let's come back to order and we'll reopen the record. Um, I'm going to ask the parties, counsel, if there's any matters we need to take up before we start the evidence again this morning. But let me say first to you, we've got a lot of construction going on in the building right now. They're rebuilding the Industrial Commission room next to us, and so it gets very loud in here sometimes. So please stay as close to the microphones as you possibly can. And if you're going to turn your head to look away at somebody, bring the microphone, drag it along with you. It's got to go along with where your mouth is. So if you're pointing in a different direction and straight at the microphone, bring the mic with you. And our court reporter will greatly appreciate that. So let me ask counsel, are there any housekeeping items or other things we need to take up before we start evidence this morning?
We have a couple of housekeeping matters.
Sure.
With the commission's indulgence. And this is in the hopes of navigating a little more clearly today than we did yesterday with respect to who's on first and who goes next. First up, of course, is Mr. D'Ascendis, who is available for cross-examination on rebuttal. He hopes to have answered all of the questions that everybody has for him by mid-morning because he hopes to catch a plane. But the first obligation is the first part of that statement, to answer all of the questions that you have. And we know the public staff has some questions as well. Next is Mr. DeStefano, who has a later obligation today for a plane. I'm not really worried about that, but I feel like I should say that out loud. We've said it before. They're both headed to Kentucky, apparently along with a bad storm front, so they'd probably rather stay here. Mr. DeStefano's testimony is denominated as rebuttal. He speaks for the company with respect to interpretation and implementation of the statute, of the rulemaking. He's been present in this process for a number of things. Excuse me. After Mr. DeStefano is Mr. Denton, the state president, who filed direct and rebuttal, and speaks for the company with respect to operation and management, and he will be responsible for the performance under the new plan, should it be approved, as he is responsible for the company's performance in North Carolina at this point. After Mr. Denton is Mr. Consul, who is the director, leaning over into this thing, who's the director of operations in the state, speaks to projects, service, customer concerns. And finally, we have Mr. Schellinger, who, as we say to him, is responsible for everything else. So he goes last. And he is particularly accountable through his testimony and with respect to the company for accounting matters and financial matters, and for many of the filings that we see here, and for much of the work done in cooperation with the public staff as we process all of the cases that we bring before the commission. So I just wanted to let you know who's up, what they speak for, and in the case of Mr. D'Ascendis and Mr. DeStefano, the fact that at some point with the commission's agreement, they leave us at some point today. That's it for me. Thank you.
All right, let me ask this, Mr. Freeman, Ms. Holt, before I see if you have any other matters we need to talk about. According to the order of witnesses that I have that was filed on November 23rd, I'm not showing that the public staff had indicated any cross-examination for Mr. DeStefano, Mr. Denton, Mr. Consul, and Mr. Schellinger. Is that still the case, or?
That's correct.
I mean, of course, you have your right of cross-examination. And for purposes of planning the day, I didn't know if that had changed, or so if that is still correct.
That is correct, with the exception of we might want to ask Mr. Schellinger a couple questions just to authenticate Exhibit 6.
Okay, well,
Yes.
That's great to know. But I think if that's the case, except with that exception, then probably what we'll do is just offer them up for commissioner questions if there are any. If there are any.
Exactly. Yes, sir. And that it is for that purpose. I mean, we know there is no cross, and I may have referred to cross because you automatically do that, but
Right.
but it's the expectation that they are, well, it's with the commitment that they would be available for any commission questions that you might have.
That works. So anything else we need to take up before we start?
Nothing more.
Okay, great. Then Mr. DeScendis, you're back up and you're still under oath. And as As we've indicated, you're here for cross-examination by public staff on your rebuttal testimony. And Mr. Freeman, Ms. Holt, I'm not sure which of you is going to be doing the cross.
Thank you. Thank you, Commissioner.
Right.
Good morning, Mr. D'Ascendis. This is now your rebuttal testimony. And yesterday we discussed, I can't remember if it was on or off the record, that you'd like to leave here at 10. So I went through and reduced a lot of my questions. So
I appreciate
I want to leave enough time for your counsel and the commissioners to ask questions as well. Yesterday, we discussed exhibits 3 and 13, which are, and you don't need to turn to them unless you'd like to, which are the ones that talk about current ROEs ranging from 9.5 to 9.6 for the last many years. And I think that you said, hey, some of these cases that just came in a few months ago are relying on old and historical data.
Yes, sir.
In your rebuttal testimony, you talk about speeches made in November of this year. You talk very much about current market conditions, don't you?
That's right.
Isn't it possible that the commissions in other states did the same thing?
It depends when the record closes, and it depends on some of the procedural schedules, but I'm sure that there was opposing witness testimonies that came in after the filing of the direct testimonies of the company, and then they may or may not have updated their testimonies and positions in rebuttal. There may not be rebuttal based on some of the procedural schedules.
Thank you. The decision of whether or not to file this case was solely in the power of Carolina Water, correct?
Absolutely.
And it chose to file in the summer of this year, correct?
Yes, sir.
At the peak, I think inflation peaked now, looking back, we can say in June of 2022
No. I think it was September.
of this year,
Yes.
and it's now coming down.
It's coming down, but still significantly higher than what it usually is.
If the company had waited 6 months and let these volatile times calm down, they wouldn't have had some of the risks that you address in your testimony, right?
You don't know what's in the future, and if you look at my direct results and my rebuttal results, you'll see that every single one of the model results have gone up since May to October. So those 5 months, things have only gotten more risky for the companies.
But we think it's going to get better. You think it's going to be 2% inflation in the future. I know not tomorrow, but in the future, right?
It says over the next 30 years, so all of us will hopefully be retired by then, and it will still be 250, and which is about 50% higher than what it usually is or the Fed target is. So if you look at it that way, no, it may be moderating, and that's my testimony, but it's still high.
We can agree, though, that fortunately, another moderator has come along, which is the new multi-year law, which Fitch, Moody's, S&P all view as a sort of credit positive favorable to the company, right?
I've only, so I don't agree with what you just said because I didn't see any evidence by anybody that said specifically regarding multi-year rate plan in this state. And I didn't see anything from S&P or Moody's about it either.
Do you remember the exhibit that we looked at in some length yesterday?
That's a Washington multi-year rate plan.
I understand, but we can agree that Fitch in the state of Washington thought that was credit positive.
Yes, but like I said yesterday, it's a relative risk, and I don't think I need to go into it again. But the several states and all of the proxy companies, excepting Middlesex Water, have some sort of multi-year rate plan or forward future test year in their market data.
And you remember Mr. Hinton testified about the Janey's report, which we had misnumbered as 9, but was in fact Exhibit 8.
Is Exhibit 8
There's
or the cross Exhibit 8?
it is Mr. Hinton's Exhibit 8.
Okay.
We discussed it yesterday.
Not you and I.
Correct. You remember from Exhibit 8 of Mr. Hinton's direct testimony, not the panel, but just his testimony.
Right, but we didn't discuss it.
Okay, it was discussed. I apologize.
Okay.
That consistency of rate-making treatment, the allowed ROE, and minimization of regulatory lag are factors that Janie evaluates.
Yes, and like I said, I agree with that. It's more of a relative risk than looking at just Carolina Water Service. I think that's the disconnect between me and Mr. Hinton, is that he sees it straight as Carolina Water's risk is reduced based on the MYRP, but I see it as now they're just basically even with the rest of the country or rest of the proxy group. So it's not that I don't see the MYRP being helpful for the company. I see it as being relatively the same as what is going on in other parts of the country.
Can we agree that the proxy group includes entities that are spanning many states?
Yes.
Some of those states do not have multi-year.
If you look at my proxy group, and I agree that some don't, and I think I have it in my rebuttal testimony, but I also have it in a data request. And I don't know which one I should bring up. But I'll bring up my testimony. Okay. So you look at page 40 of my rebuttal testimony. I talk about identifying multi-year rate plans that are common in the state of California, in which California Water obviously is California. American States Water is California. California American Water is in there also. And then you talk about fully forecasted future test years, which are in Iowa, Tennessee, Virginia, Pennsylvania, and New York. And that subsumes the market prices of Essential's largest by far water utility, Aqua Pennsylvania. It also subsumes York, even though I don't have it in my rebuttal testimony, it's in my direct testimony, and also Essential Utilities and all of the other ones. So while they do cover several states, the majority of those states and the majority of the customers underneath the service territories of the proxy group have some sort of, if not fully forecasted forward test years, multi-year rate plans, and then to a lesser extent, the distribution improvement charges.
I think my point was a little more narrow than that, which is some component of the companies in your proxy group, some component of their income comes from states, South Carolina, where there is no multi-year.
I don't think any water company represented in this proxy group has operations in South Carolina.
Well, it's Blue Granite. Is Blue Granite in South Carolina?
That's Utilities Inc., and they're not in my proxy group.
Okay. But we can agree that some parts of your proxy groups are in states that don't have multi-years. And
go ahead.
with your caveat, the second thing is some of the companies in your proxy group also have unregulated activities, correct?
Yes, but we have gone through the selection criteria, and if it helps the commission, I could provide the regulated net operating income and assets attributable to regulated water service for the proxy group companies that show that the average assets and NOI are somewhere around and upwards and in excess of 80% regulated water.
That means a fifth of their, just using your rough numbers, a fifth of their activity comes from unregulated activities.
Rough numbers, but 80% is it's a substantial number, and both me and Mr. Hinton use them as a gauge for a pure play water company.
Carolina Water is entirely regulated, correct?
That's absolutely right.
There was some discussion yesterday of a paper by, I don't know if it's Mr. or Dr. Zepp.
Dr. Zepp.
Dr. Zepp, thank you. You would agree with me that Dr. Zepp thought that the inability to borrow money could be the cause of the differences in Dr. Wong's study.
That is a part of it, yes.
And we know from yesterday's testimony between you and I that Mr. Drennan in this case had said that having access to capital investment to meet crucial funding needs was an advantage of Carolina Water being part of Corix.
That may be true, but they're also not rated, so they don't have significant access to capital compared to all of the other companies in the proxy group, which is at least rated by S&P or Moody's.
So is Mr. Drennan incorrect that it doesn't have access to capital?
It has access to capital, but it doesn't have the access to capital that the rated companies of the proxy group have.
I would like to talk about the methods that you used and Mr. Hinton used to evaluate and come to the ROE figure. And we talked about DCF.
Yes, sir.
Okay. And I think that you performed on page 20 of your testimony, sort of fixed Mr. Hinton's math and came up with 10 to 10.8% as being the DCF range.
And you're looking at
Page 20 of
the illustration would be on DWD2R. That would coincide with that page 20, correct?
I know one of them does. I've just forgotten the number off the top of my head.
Okay. Yeah, I'll see if I can't point you to it. Yes, it looks like it's 2R, and then let me turn to page 22, so then we're looking at everything in context.
Okay, so this is where you sort of said, hey, if we did things the way I think they should be done, it'd come in at 10 to 10.8. This is rebuttal testimony, page 20, that area also on schedule DWD-2R, correct?
Yes, sir.
And that's what you're telling the commission is, okay, I've done Mr. Hinton's method under the way I think it should be done.
Well, it's not, I think, yes, you and I went over for some length talking about the appropriateness of historical growth rates and their applicability in the DCF analysis. I have provided significant evidence that shows that projected EPS growth rates is a superior measure in the DCF. And I also discussed how analysts use historical data to inform their analysis. In this case, so that was the second columns 2, 3, and 4 are the EPS growth rates. The next 3 columns are because the indicated ROEs from those DCF models are less than the marginal cost of debt. And that is a nonsensical number because equity being behind in the back of line for investors in a case of a liquidation, it would automatically be more risky and require a higher rate of return. So if an investor looks at, for instance, Middlesex Water and their A-rated bonds, and you could get an A-rated bond in December or in October at 5.25%, and you have a DCF that indicates 4%. It just doesn't make any sense that debt would be, you'd be getting more money for debt investment than an equity investment at this time or ever.
And I'm going to use that Middlesex Water if you don't mind. If you'll look at 2R.
Yes, sir.
Value line, the column says value line says 4.5 and then 2.7. Did I read those correct?
Those are the growth rates, yes.
Yeah. And you're saying those are nonsensical.
No, the fallout, so the last two columns, the 4.0% indicated rate of return and the 4.9% indicated rate of return are both nonsensical because they are under the marginal cost of debt.
I understand.
Okay.
The Yahoo indicated ROE and average indicated ROE, the far right columns of 2R.
Yes, sir.
4.0. So you used the EPS. And the E there stands for earnings, right?
Yes, sir.
So when you applied your methodology using earnings only, you came up with a nonsensical answer for Middlesex Water Company.
Yes, and if you look at my updated numbers, or if you look at my direct testimony, if you look at the ROE indicated using the CAPM and the risk premium model, you'll see, if you take a look at Schedule DWD 1R, page 11, you'll see an 1112 PRPM result for Middlesex. And then if you look at DWD page, Schedule 1R on page 26, with the CAPM analysis, you see Middlesex Water indicated ROE of 11.26. So you have risk premium and CAPM results, which are eerily similar, but a DCF result that is nonsensical, in my opinion, and the opinion of most people.
Your method focuses on earnings.
Yes.
It doesn't focus on dividends per share, book value per share, those sorts of mechanisms.
That's true, and I have explained that in pages 16 through 19, and well, 16 through 20. But I guess the key point would be, if it was important to investors that DPS and EPS growth rates were important in doing a DCF analysis, they would be published, the expected ones would be published in investor journals or things like that, where you don't see it anywhere other than value line. If you can look and you can see that there are several long-term earnings growth rates from analysts across many different platforms, including Yahoo and Zacks and S&P Global and things like that. And you don't see expected DPS growth rates. You don't see expected BVPS growth rates, which means that they're discounted in the eyes of the investor.
Does that not ignore that some investors very much care about the dividends they receive from their stocks?
Well, like I said, there's several academic articles that I showed that EPS growth rates were the superior measure, and Mr. Hinton provided no evidence that investors rely on DPS or BVPS in his testimony.
Well, he used it, and also he used value line, which is a pretty common thing, isn't it?
I agree with that, but I use value line too, but he doesn't justify or support his evidence that DPS and BVPS are valid inputs to a DCF model.
That's the main difference in your calculations, is you're ignoring the dividends being paid
No,
and the historical nature.
no.
Okay.
So the difference is that I'm not ignoring dividends being paid because you grow the dividends and you use the dividend growth, you use the earnings growth rate to grow the dividends, right? And earnings drive share price. Okay. So the disconnect between me and Mr. Hinton, I think we apply the model the same. Him and I just disagree to the extent that historical data and BVPS and DPS, which are book value per share and dividends per share, and I'm sorry I didn't define that earlier, that he thinks that they're appropriate. I do not. I provide evidence that my measure is appropriate. He does not.
I understand. I'd now like to talk about the risk premium methods. And I think both of you used a risk premium method in this case.
That's right. And I generally agree with his application of the model and using the current interest rates and then the full the case by case basis as opposed to the year by year basis. We came up with the same number, which is 9.88. So I agree with the way he does his model. Well, the theory behind his model. And while I disagree with some of his inputs, our results are comparable in this instance.
Not just comparable, but literally identical, 9.88.
With using current measures, yes. Using projected measures, I have 10.12. But yes, you're right, exactly the same number, and that's what I said.
If you'll pause, if I could have the commission's indulgence for a moment. Mr. DeSantis, I'd like to end on that note of agreement between you and Mr. Hinton. Thank
Isn't
you.
that great?
Redirect.
Company has no redirect. Thank you.
All right. With that, we'll see if commissioners have questions. Anyone? Commissioner Hughes? Looks like you're going to make your plane, Mr. DeSantis.
Thank you, everybody. I'll see you in January, I guess. Happy holidays to everybody.
And to you, you are excused. Thank you for testifying.
Thank you.
Ms. Sanford, Mr. Olson?
1 second.
Certainly.
So- It's just hard for me to keep track. Thank you, Commissioner Clodfelter. We call company witness Dante DeStefano, please.
Left hand on the Bible, right hand up. Do you solemnly and sincerely swear that the testimony you're about to give in this proceeding will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Thank you. Please be seated.
Would you state your name, business address, and title for the record, please?
Yes, my name is Dante DeStefano. I am the Director of Regulatory Affairs for Corix Infrastructure, Inc. My business address is 500 West Monroe Street, Suite 3600, Chicago, Illinois.
Thank you. Mr. DeStefano is available for cross.
All right, I don't have any cross reserve, but we'll see if there is any cross. No cross. Okay. Questions from commissioners for Mr. DeStefano? Anyone? Thank you for taking the oath.
Thank you.
That was the heavy lift for the day. And I think you'll make your flight as well. You may be excused.
He may make Dylan's flight. Share a cab.
Right?
Let's see. So our next witness is Don Denton.
All right, Mr. Denton. And if you'll ready yourself for the oath as well. Do you solemnly and sincerely swear that the testimony you're about to give in this proceeding will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I did.
Thank you.
Good morning, Mr. Denton. Would you state your name, business address, and title for the record, please?
Donald H. Denton III, 5821 Fairview Road, Charlotte, North Carolina, 28209. I'm president of Carolina Water Service.
Thank you. Mr. Denton is available for examination.
Any cross-examination?
No questions.
With that, then, questions from commissioners? All right, Mr. Denton, you're not going to get off as easily as Mr. DeStefano. Do you have the joint partial stipulation and settlement available to you?
I did.
I want to ask you a couple of questions about that, if I can. On page 14 of the stipulation, you can get that up in front of you. And I'll ask my question. I think I can get you there while you're calling it up.
Yeah.
The parties agree that one of the metrics they'll use is involves the utilization of the state revolving fund program. And I've got a couple of questions about that stipulation. The first does the stipulation contemplate that the company will pursue only grant funding for the identified projects, or will it also be pursuing low-interest loan fund from the revolving fund?
We would look to both for whatever possible. Right now, we've looked at a number of projects that we've identified that we would like to apply for, and whether or not it is either the loan or the grant funding, where it's applicable.
Okay.
Right.
So we can understand the stipulation to be, you're going to go for whichever or both you might be able to be eligible for.
Eligible for and makes sense for the individual projects, yes.
Got it. The second question really relates to the specific list of projects, and that's on page 18 of the stipulation. Is it just in a general term, educate us on how you arrived at that specific list of projects? Was there some determination by the company and the public staff that those might potentially be eligible for either grant funding or loan funding?
That's actually how we went through it. It was based on the very limited and focused area within the SRF that we could apply for particular projects. We went through our list of projects and said, these are the larger ones that actually we think would fall into that bucket.
Okay. Were there any projects that you have in your capital improvement program that might have been eligible, or you thought might have been eligible, that didn't make the list on page 18 of the stipulation?
I don't believe there were. There might be some that are smaller projects that would be eligible that, quite frankly, but I'd have to go back and verify that, but we could.
The cost of the application process and the delay in getting the state funds might be greater than the value of the project.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. All right. On page 19 of the stipulation, it's in paragraph 4B. There is an agreement with the public staff that the company and the public staff will work together to solve the problem with the South Carolina customers who are part of the Danby utility system. And I guess the question I want to first, how long do you think that's going to take? Have we got any sort of predictors about when you'll report back on that?
We don't have a timeline established yet, but we have started the conversation with the Office of Regulatory Staff in South Carolina. We've updated public staff, and we're trying to get a meeting scheduled between all three parties to have that conversation.
Great. The question I'm interested in today, I understand you don't have a solution, is that going to be something that just involves accounting issues, or will that also involve operational issues?
It wouldn't necessarily involve operational issues, to my knowledge. Right now, it's logistically looking at those 27 customers that actually sit in South Carolina that are serviced by this facility. So, and how they're addressed between North Carolina and South Carolina.
But so far as you could currently see, that's not going to, the solution to that issue for those 27 customers is probably not going to involve any operational changes in the way you operate the Danby system.
None whatsoever as far as
Okay.
I know.
Okay, that's what I had for you.
Okay.
Let's see if there are questions on, any other questions? Commissioners have questions? Commissioner McKissick.
And this is in follow-up to Commissioner Clodfelter's questions about the projects which you'll be seeking, assistance or funding through the state revolving fund. how long do you anticipate, based upon information that's available to you today, that it will take to determine whether these particular projects might likely be eligible and likewise be funded?
Well, one of the things we're actually doing, Commissioner, is we're going to be standing up at the very beginning of the year. I won't call it an Office of Grants and Funding, but within the organization, we're putting together a team that's going to be focused on applying for these grants. And then obviously, assuming we're successful, hopefully successful administering these grants. There's a lot of process and additional process that we have to put in place in order to administer these grants. I saw this happen when I was with Duke in the ARRA funding round. We were successful and achieved a grant under the Obama administration. And there is Davis-Bacon compliance and other things that has to be addressed as part of the grant process. So we're going to set up an office that's going to help us administer, again, hopefully that we're successful in doing so. But that'll start in January for us.
That'll start in January.
Yes, sir. We'll
And then
start
you
standing that up.
reasonably anticipate, I mean, I'm just wondering how long you might wait in the pipeline till later find out that you will not receive funding before you might otherwise pursue more traditional means of moving these projects forward.
Yeah, we won't wait. The projects will continue to proceed, but we will also apply in parallel for the grants and funding
Parallel.
in parallel.
Got it.
Yes, sir.
And you mentioned Davis-Bacon compliance.
Yes, sir.
So those are wage determinations that are going to be decided in terms of what you pay for specific categories of labor for the
Correct.
jobs that you would be pursuing. Have there been any preliminary analysis done to see how Davis-Bacon wages might compare to what you might pay for rather, private sector type projects?
We have not done that yet.
Okay. And, well, thank you. And there was one other question I had relating to the performance matrix that are identified
Yes,
in
sir.
this particular stipulation. Now, it says that you're going to go back and within 180 days, determine what incentives might be created and what penalties might be created. Have there been any preliminary determination made as to what those standards might look like, those criteria might look like?
Public staff offered some up as part of the original negotiations. We, in talking and discussing with public staff, said that we wanted to make sure that the incentives and penalties were applicable and weren't incentivizing or causing what I would consider adverse types of reactions. And so we wanted to have thoughtful discussions with regards to the incentives and penalties such that we would bring something back to the commission where both parties were able to provide those and that they would be reasonable and actionable.
Very good. I was just curious as to how those discussions had occurred.
Yeah.
And I look forward to observing those and seeing them. I'm sure the other commissioners do as well. And hope that they are standards that are clearly articulable, but more importantly, do appropriately incentivize and likewise oppose appropriate penalties based upon inability to obtain certain performance metrics.
There's a great example, and if you allow, we had in one of the metrics deals with project
Yeah.
schedules, right? We did have one project in particular wherein we delayed the project. It was actually in Mountain County because the HOA specifically asked us to delay the project because they actually had a series of weddings that they were going to be hosting during the period of the project and didn't want the roads and all the equipment sitting there during the wedding season. So we actually had to delay that project, and actually because it was in the mountains and it got into the winter, and so we actually delayed it almost a year. But that was at the request of the HOA, and that was, I believe, the right call to make, right? Working with the customer base, but we would have been penalized potentially if it was strictly on a scheduled basis for that one particular project. And so we want to make sure as we're thinking about this, that we're allowing for and making sure we've got the right incentives and penalties in place, that we don't want to preclude that type of decision making. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, because one of the criteria is timely completion of CPI projects as well as completion of the projects on budget.
Correct.
And as I recall in the stipulation, there was an agreement to reduce the estimated cost of projects. I've forgotten the exact percentage. Is that correct?
It was a 10% cut with regards to
10% across the
contingency.
board.
Yes.
And based upon information available to you today, notwithstanding the inflationary period that we're going through, I take it that you all feel as if that 10% of cost of board reduction is reasonable and appropriate at this time?
Well, we actually have a difference of opinion in what contingency means with regards to the public staff. However, the 10% was taken in context with the entire stipulation and settlement, not as a single component of the stipulation and settlement. Therefore, we look forward to having further conversations with the public staff with regards to what we believe contingency is and how it's utilized in project management.
And there was a question about contingencies being excessive, as I recall,
Yes, sir.
but there weren't any agreements reached in this stipulation dealing with the contingencies that would be appropriate moving forward at this time. Is that
Well,
correct?
Contingencies vary based on the uncertainty of the project. And how we look at contingency is what I would consider Project Management Institute, other groups that specialize in project execution. We try and adopt those policies, but contingency is meant as a way of addressing uncertainty and risk, but is meant as a way of achieving an estimate at completion for a project. And the intent is that that project will spend those monies. It's not meant to be as a cushion, but it's meant to address the uncertainty associated with an estimate. And that when you reach the end of the project, you have consumed that contingency as a part of the addressing the uncertainty.
And I guess the contingency might also be based upon the stage the project might be when you're
Absolutely.
doing your initial analysis.
Yes, sir. The earlier in the process, the higher the uncertainty, therefore the larger the contingency. As you proceed through the project process, get to, let's say, a 3/4 of a design of a facility, right? The anticipation is your uncertainty is much, much less. Your contingency would be much less.
And I recall there was being some discussion about a project down in Mooresville where contingency was projected at a fairly substantial level, where it came also within budget. Could you speak to that a little bit?
Well, as you,
As I recall, there was some clarity provided about there being dual lines being installed as opposed to replacement of a line.
right, there was, I think, some confusion with regards to the fact that we were not necessarily taking a line out of service. We were adding another line in addition to the existing line in Mooresville, and increasing capacity coming through down that very busy highway. So that, I think, was a little bit of confusion early on with regards to what the intent was with that project.
Well, thank you. I think it provided some clarity about issues that were in the back of my mind in reading through the stipulation.
Commissioner Kimmerer?
Mr. Dent, just to follow up briefly on questions by Mr. Montgomery and McKissick in regards to the state revolving fund grants. The stipulation has 7 projects that you would be committed to and required to apply for those grants. But outside of this settlement agreement, if the company identifies additional projects that might be able to apply or applicable for those grants, assume that outside of the settlement agreement, the company would pursue applying for those grants if you apply those additional projects. Could you just confirm that that is something that you do outside?
We would evaluate each and every project that we believe is applicable, right? And that it is cost effective, right? As we move forward in this. Yes, that's part of our vision, that we move forward to do that.
Thank you for that comment.
Absolutely.
All right, Mr. Denton, I have a question I was going to spring on Mr. Junis, but in fairness, I ought to ask it of you as well.
Okay.
In other words, I will spring it on you too. So the statute here we're looking at says that the performance performance-based metrics shall be part of the plan. That, it's a pretty strong signal the legislature considers that a fairly significant element of the plan. And so what we've got in the stipulation is an agreement between the company and the public staff that you'll bring us the meat on the bones for that essential element within 6 months of the date we issue an order in the rate case. Well, that's a key piece of the rate case. And so it's still hanging out there as a loose end 6 months after we issue an order. We give you, if we finish the hearing today, we'll give you some time to file proposed orders and get a transcript in, and then we'll go to work on the commission's order. And we may not have an order out before sometime in January or February. And you're going to be well into the first rate year before we even take a look at what the flesh on the bones, as I say, looks like. And I understand the stipulation says that whatever happens at that point gets retroactive to the beginning of rate year one, but I will say to you, and I'll use a fairly neutral word, that it just causes me a little discomfort to leave that hanging out there that long. So suppose the commission were to say to even the public staff, that's too long. You guys have been talking, keep talking. You know, I'm sure none of you have anything booked for Christmas Eve or New Year's Eve, so you could talk then. What if we were to tell you, we want something back in 60 days from the conclusion of this hearing? What would your reaction be?
Well, first, I would say that we do have metrics. So we've submitted the metrics. I think what we're talking about is the incentives and penalties, really, and also whether or not there are any either additional or adjustments to these metrics. But we do have metrics that we've put forth just from that standpoint. But if the commission were to come back and say 60 days, we would move to do our best to be back in 60 days.
Enough said. It was just a shot across the bow.
Okay.
I don't know what we'll decide to do collectively, but I just wanted to ask the question. Okay. That's all I have. Thank you. Any questions on commissioners' questions?
No questions.
No questions.
Thank you, Mr. Dent. We appreciate it.
Our next witness is Tony Consul.
Thank you. Mr. Consul, do you solemnly and sincerely swear that the testimony you're about to give in this matter shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Great. Thank you, sir.
Good morning, Mr. Consul.
Morning.
Could you please state and spell your name for the record?
Tony Consul, Konsul, Director of State Operations, 5821 Fairview Road, Charlotte, North Carolina, 28209.
Thank you very much, sir. The witness is available for cross.
Any
No
cross?
No questions.
Okay. Any questions then from commissioners? Okay. You're done.
Thank you.
You bet. Thank you.
Our next witness is Matt Schellinger.
Good morning, sir. Do you solemnly and sincerely swear that the testimony you're about to give in this proceeding will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? I do. Great. Please be seated.
Mr. Schellinger, would you state your name, business address, and position for the record, please?
My name's Matthew P. Schellinger II. I'm employed by Carolina Water Service as the Regional Director of Financial Planning and Analysis. My address is 5821 Fairview Road, Suite 401, Charlotte, North Carolina, 28209.
Thank you. And Commissioner Clodfelter, I had a couple of additional direct questions based upon that exhibit that we talked about yesterday, and then I understand the public staff has some cross.
I understand that as well, so let's hear your questions on it.
Okay, thank you very much. Mr. Schellinger, you reviewed, after you received some information and assistance from the public staff, you reviewed public staff DeAcenda's proposed cross exhibit number 6. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And you reviewed the calculations and the math that was supporting the exhibit, correct?
That's correct.
Right. Is the math in the exhibit accurately stated, in your
The-
opinion?
The math in the NOI change columns and the revenue requirement change columns is accurately stated. I believe the total revenue requirement change sum is a mischaracterization of the revenue requirements that would actually be for the company, depending on which direction we go.
Which direction we go with respect to ROE? Is that,
With which direction we go with respect to if it's a base year case versus a multi-year rate plan case.
okay. So can you explain how that total revenue requirement is mischaracterized? Can you explain that a little more?
Sure. In the event that the multi-year rate plan or the WISP is approved, the company would go from its present rates straight into rate year one rates. So I think on this exhibit specifically, using the base year revenue requirement is effectively saying, oh, the company's getting 4 years of revenue requirements, but really it would only be the 3 years of revenue requirements. So what that results in is an overstatement of that total revenue requirement change figure.
And those were the only observations that you had after your examination of the exhibit. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. Mr. Schellinger is available for cross.
Cross-examination.
Mr. Schellinger, thank you for that. If we remove from Exhibit 6 the base years, which are approximately $900,000, would that satisfy the mischaracterization concern that you have?
I believe it's more than $900,000, but if we were to remove that column, I think it would satisfy my concerns.
Can you give me, and I'm trying to add and talk, which is always a mistake.
I think it's closer to 1.2 million, a little under.
And if I take 1.2 million out of 6.7, I've got about 5.5.
That's fair.
Okay. So that would leave it. I see. Could it be 1.17 million?
Yes.
And so if we subtract 1.17 from 6.76, 5.5.
A little more than 5.5, yes.
Okay, I understand. I want to find areas of agreement, not commit that we don't that we aren't sacrificing the base year issue. But we can agree that for rate years 1, 2, and 3, approximately slightly more than 5.5 million would be the total revenue requirement change.
If nothing else changed other than the ROE, that would be the number, yes.
Thank you very much.
Redirect.
No redirect.
Questions from commissioners? Go ahead. Commissioner McKissick, go ahead.
Sure. And this is relating to your rebuttal testimony, I guess on pages 28, 29, dealing with recurring capital spend and the public staff's approach to this, I guess, calculating it over a kind of a 3-year period. Of course, your observations were that you had objections to the way that they projected dealing with that based upon the way cost had been incurred historically. Could you speak to that?
I can. I believe the public staff. So let me back up. When we were originally projecting out our recurring spend through the multi-year, we had used a 40-month average. At that point, it was the preceding 3 years and then the 4 months into 2022. And that was what we were using as our average going forward, projecting out that recurring spend. Public staff backed it up to a 36-month average, but used the 3 full calendar years instead of, say, the most recent 36-month average or the 36-month average ending March 31, 22. So that was really the fundamental disagreement there, is why, say, a 36-month average with a calendar year end was somehow more appropriate than the most recent 36-month average, or with the test year ended 36 months, or any other ending period, really.
And I guess what you did, you were looking at, about $200,000 a month or so that had been spent out over, say, estimated to be like a 40-month period.
I think those are two separate issues. So one of the issues is the 36-month versus 40-month
Okay.
portion. The other area of disagreement with the recurring spend originally was for items that the public staff said is really kind of supported by our contributions in aid of construction. So that's where the 200,000 figure comes from. So public staff had originally removed a subset of accounts where they said these accounts really are all CIAC. Our pushback was really, I don't disagree that is CIAC there, but it's not all CIAC. Mains break, we repair those mains. That repair is not contribution at that point, right? So in my rebuttal testimony, I've and in the settlement as well, we came to agreement that really those accounts do have recurring spend, and it should be net of CIAC.
Thank you for providing that clarity. Don't have any further questions.
Anything further? All right,
Commissioner, I'd like to move exhibits. Oh, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. Commissioner Kimmerer.
I wanted to follow up about this Exhibit 6 to be clear about what yours and the company's position is. If, with the understanding that this exhibit has been orally modified, or an updated exhibit is provided that removes the base year amounts and then changes the total revenue requirement change to the approximately $5.5 million. Is the company then in agreement with those numbers? Do you have any issues with this Exhibit 6 based upon the changes that you just testified to?
I don't think I would have any issue with it.
Okay.
I think really what this exhibit shows is if the ROE changes, the revenue requirement changes.
Mhm.
And I think conceptually, we don't have a disagreement with that.
Thank you.
Any questions on the commissioner's questions? Commissioner Hughes, I'm sorry.
This is just something that I've been struggling with, and I thought maybe you could help me. We're talking a little bit about performance measures and tracking things. It's always seemed to me a challenge to track the trade-offs between capital spends and operating savings. And I think that's often kind of discussed as a way of getting to innovation. And I think maybe the biggest example in your proposal is going to AMI and potentially having some savings there. How, as an organization, would you track? Okay, we make this capital investment in year one, so we're going to get this operating savings in year 2 and 3. Now that we're moving to a multi-year framework, it seems like we have an opportunity to actually really track savings and verify savings and show customers savings. And I just, I mean, I could ask the same question to the public staff. I'm just curious what your take on that question would be.
Sure. I appreciate the question. I think it really depends on the type of project, and something like AMI specifically might be one of the easier ones to actually specifically identify savings, right? Because you can specifically identify a meter read if it's a third-party meter reader. In a lot of cases, it may not be a third-party meter reader, and instead that savings isn't necessarily a monetary savings, but it allows our operators to spend their time in a different area instead of meter reading. So it's a difficult problem. There is savings with some of these projects, but there's also additional costs that can be incurred with some of these projects. And it's not always as clear cut trying to get to what that savings point is. Through discovery, we responded to a number of questions specifically regarding meter reading, and we showed there is movement in meter reading, but we do a large amount of meter reading in-house. So that savings gets transferred to other operational benefits, and it may not necessarily be a direct dollar for dollar in those situations.
So no easy answers.
No easy answers.
Thanks.
We look though, and we try to understand those movements, but it's not just a simple, math problem in an Excel sheet.
Yeah. So sometimes when the case is presented, it seems to be presented, I'm not taking Carolina Water, but just in general, it seems to be presented as a simple calculation in the cost benefit analysis or the kind of justification. But then on the back end, it's, like you said, very tricky. So it just makes it a little difficult for us to kind of approve something with a promise and then,
I understand.
So
Yeah.
that was just 2 cents. Thanks.
It's not a question, but I'm going to channel Commissioner Hughes a little further on this because I know where he's coming from. We've had a different proceeding involving a different company and a different issue, but I understand where this is coming from and I share it. And I want to just say to the public staff and the company both that as you continue your discussions under the stipulation, it seems to me that there is more work to be done than just to define the incentives and the penalties, but the method of measurement of whether you've attained the metric or not, whether you've fallen short or whether you've exceeded the metric. There's also some work to still be done on clarifying how that's going to happen. Some of these are fairly straightforward, but others, and Commissioner Hughes has given an example, I can look at a couple of the others are the same way. The measurement of whether or not you've met the agreed standard is, at least as I read the stipulation, still a lot of work to be done on that issue. So that's more of a comment than it is a question.
May I make a comment to your
You may
comment?
indeed.
I appreciate it. I think metrics are good data, right? But they don't necessarily all have to have targets for them to be informing. And maybe I'll stop there.
Some will and some won't.
Some will and some won't. That's right.
Anything further from commissioners? Commissioner Kimmerer, sure.
Yeah, to follow up on your last comment.
Okay.
Can you give some examples so we can better understand what situation?
I definitely want to clarify that because I think all metrics in some way are informative or helpful. What I think is that some metrics don't necessarily lend themselves to if above target or below target, you've succeeded or not succeeded, right? It's target or the metrics can be very informative without necessarily needing did you get above or below, right? And I think that's more of where my position is.
Okay.
Thank you.
Commissioner Duffley?
So to follow up, can you
Yes.
provide an example?
Let's see here, let me go through the list. Water loss might be a good example. If you have a percentage of water loss, it could be across all of our systems, it could be well systems, it could be purchase systems. Having a high water loss doesn't mean that there's anything the company has necessarily done wrong. It may be absolutely appropriate that we didn't have that exceptional capital spend to reduce that number to some target or to some metric. So that would be one where I think I'd be hesitant to say, you put a target on it and then all of a sudden you're making maybe capital investments that didn't make sense pre-target. So.
Thank you. That does provide clarity.
In those instances, though, at least the metric signals to you that perhaps further inquiry may be warranted.
Absolutely.
Sometimes it's an incentive, sometimes it's a penalty, sometimes it's just a signal that you need to do some more questioning.
I agree.
Got it. Yes, Commissioner McKissick.
Yeah. And on the same note, I think the critical thing that we're looking for, or certainly I'm looking for, is that when we see what comes forth related to these performance matrix in 180 days after entry of the order, that there are articulable standards, that there are benchmarks to the extent to which they can be established, as well as penalties that seem reasonable, proper, and appropriate. Because in my mind, if we're creating incentives, the penalties ought to be commensurate. And I'm curious to see how this moves forward. I understand that there wasn't perhaps sufficient time for this to all get worked out between the company and the public staff. But I think the more specificity and the more detail, the better. We see that submission. And I understand there will be certain categories like water loss where it may be more challenging. But at the same time, I'm really hopeful that we will have something that we can look forward to contrasting, comparing, doing critical analysis as a basis for whether these performance standards are working or not. So I'll hope that that comes forth when that submission comes in.
Understand. And we look forward to working with the public staff.
Thank you.
One more, Commissioner Duffley.
And along that same vein, when you have a situation where you cannot put specific measurement metrics or measurements around, for example, water loss, just provide examples or explanations as to why it might create perverse incentives or absurd results. So that the commission understands why there may not be a discrete measurement surrounding that metric. Thank you.
I'm not sure I'm the best person to talk about that, and I do apologize there. I think really maybe the one example I gave you on water loss, maybe incentivizing some capital investment that otherwise would not occur would be an example of that. I'm not sure I have any other specific examples that I could provide. Sure.
I'm not asking for it today. I'm
Oh,
just stating when you're working through these.
Got it.
Going once, going twice, going 3 or 4, 5 or 6 times. All right, let me just say to the parties, I think you can see, get some insight into sort of the commission's interest in this aspect of the case. And it is, as I commented with Mr. Denton, it's the most undeveloped piece of the stipulation. And yet you can see from the dialogue that the commissioners, I don't think I'm speaking out of turn based on the questions that I've just been listening to. I think the commissioners consider it a very critical piece of the case, and it's still to be determined. So with that, are there questions on the commission's questions?
I would like to address the accounting issues, but just briefly.
Sure.
The rate year 1 begins April 1st, 2023.
Correct.
So from the date of this commission's order through March 31st, 2023, there could be a revenue impact. We just don't know what it is yet.
You might have messed me up on those dates because you went April 2023 to March 2023. I
The
apologize.
rate year begins in April.
Sure.
The first year. The base year ends in March.
If the multi-year rate plan is approved, there is no base year. The base year is only informative of rate year 1. So if the multi-year is approved, there is no base year. If the multi-year is not approved, you switch to the base year.
And the multi-year begins April 1st, 2023.
Correct.
Okay. Commissioners, and I don't want to foreclose additional questioning, but I would propose to submit an Exhibit 21, I think, with the commission's approval, or a modified
But
Exhibit 6.
before we do that, let me see if there are any questions from the company on the commissioner's
sorry.
questions. Okay.
I don't think so. We're just going to see where this is going.
I'm going to follow you too. All right, back to you, Mr. Freeman.
We have agreement on 3/4 of the years outlined here, and I'm a big fan of agreement. I think there is a disagreement about how the base rate finances will be impacted, but certainly I don't want to have an exhibit in the record that is mischaracterizing, I think is the term they use. So what I'd propose to do is submit either a modified 6 or an Exhibit 21 and not put this one in that has the 3 years in which there is agreement.
Well, I was going to suggest something similar to you because I think the record right now is hopelessly muddied on what Exhibit 6 does and doesn't do. And I think it'd be terrible to have that be all we have in the record. But before I hear you further on that, I want to ask this question. Was the information that was provided for Mr. Schellinger to use to provide his testimony this morning on direct and cross, was that same information provided to the commission staff?
We copied Mr. Mertz on the email.
That's good. Thank you. So commission staff has that same information. All right. Now, I think the motion is that the public staff be allowed to submit a late filed exhibit, which will be designated as proposed cross-examination Exhibit 21, and would be a revision to what we've been calling proposed Exhibit 6.
I see. Yeah, I'm sorry. And so you said
Response.
we would not, I'm sorry, I missed the very last part of what you said. We would not admit 6.
We will not,
Admit
I
6.
will sustain the objection to Exhibit 6
Thank you.
as it
And
has been presented.
And with respect to the late filed exhibit, if we could talk for just a minute about the most efficient way to do that, does it make sense to propose that the public staff share that exhibit with the company and we see if we work to agreement, and if we don't, we identify disagreements before it is filed?
We'll take out that 1.17 that's at issue here and million, and just have the rate years, not the base year.
And we would swap
You will
views of
see it
that
before I send it for filing.
for
And if you
filing.
don't
Okay,
like it,
great,
we'll-
great. And that way we can all be sure we are on the same page or that we're not, and we'll know why. So,
Okay, we will permit the public staff then to file a late filed exhibit, which we will designate as public staff late filed exhibit. Let's just call it late filed exhibit 21. Again, that just keeps the numbering sequence consistent. I understand the parties may wish to argue some about whether that exhibit is or is not 100% accurate or is only 95% accurate, but that's argument and not a question about what's in the exhibit itself. All right, have I got that?
and so just to be sure I understand it before
You
we
do.
leave the room, and I try to remember what we all
Sure.
said. So you'll provide us a copy of it. We will exchange comments about that. And if there is a disagreement, we will express our disagreement in a filing.
If there's a disagreement, we'll probably hear you on virtually or by telephone.
Okay, that sounds great. Thank you.
Great.
Thank you.
All right, can we let Mr. Schellinger off the hook? Anything further? All right, you are excused, sir. Thank you. All right, exhibits fun. All right, Ms. Sanford.
That completes our case, and I think it's all in. We're making sure everything's in, but we're relying on the scheduling order to think everything's in, and we don't need to move anything else at this point.
All right, then with that, we'll turn to the public staff. And before I recognize council, let me simply say, in accordance with the additional procedures order and in accordance with paragraph 7A of the joint partial stipulation settlement, Without objection from any other party and without need for further oath or affirmation to be taken, the commission will receive into evidence, along with any corrections that were filed and served pursuant to paragraph 2 of the additional procedures order, the following items. Number 1, the pre-filed joint testimony of Darrell Brown and Lynn Feasel, along with exhibits 1 and 2 thereto. Number 2, the pre-filed direct testimony of Lindsay Darden, along with Appendix A and Exhibits 1 through 16. Number 3, the pre-filed direct testimony of Michael Franklin, along with Appendix A and Exhibits 1 through 3. Number 4, the pre-filed direct testimony of Evan Hauser, along with Appendix A and Exhibits 1 through 3. Number 5, the pre-filed direct testimony of Jay Lucas, along with Appendix A and Exhibits 1 through 3. Number 6, the pre-filed direct testimony of Shashi Bhatta, along with Appendix A and Exhibit 1. And number 7, the pre-filed joint corrected and settlement testimony of Darrell Brown, Feng Zhang, and Charles Junis, along with revised Brown and Feasel Exhibits 1 and 2, and Public Staff Settlement Exhibit 1. Commission will also receive into the record pursuant to Commission Rule 1-24D, the summary of the corrected and settlement testimony of witnesses Brown, Chang, and Junis. All such pre-filed testimony will be admitted into evidence along with any corrections made and will appear in the transcript in the sequence that I have just recited for witnesses who do not provide further testimony at this hearing. Pre-filed testimony for witnesses who are called to testify in this hearing for cross-examination or questions from commissioners will be copied into the transcript immediately after they have taken their oaths. And with that said, let me remind you also that yesterday, when we were doing out of sequence, we've already admitted the pre-filed direct testimony of John Hinton and the panel of Hinton, Junis, Feng Shun, and Feng Zhang. Too many pronunciation challenges for me there, but that's already in the record as of yesterday. So Ms. Holt, Mr. Freeman, the case is now with you.
Thank you. Ms. Zhang, please state your name.
All right, let me, you're calling the panel, you're calling your panel? Okay, great. All right, then let's get the oath done. All three of you, hands on the Bible.
Benj and I are already sworn in, right?
Well, let's do
it again.
just for good order's sake. No free rides for anybody here, okay? Do all of you and each of you individually solemnly swear that the testimony you're about to give in this proceeding will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Great. Okay. Now, Ms. Holt.
Ms. Zhang, please state your name, business address, and current position with public staff.
My name is Feng Zhang. I'm a financial manager with the lecture section of the public staff accounting division. And my business address will be 430 North Southbury Street, Raleigh, North Carolina.
Thank you. Mr. Brown, please state your name, business address, and position for the record.
My name is Darrell Brown. My business address is 430 North Salisbury Street, Raleigh, North Carolina, 27699. My position is financial analyst with public staff, with the accounting division of the public staff. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Junis, please state your name, business address, and position with the public staff.
Charles Junis, 430 North Salisbury Street, Director of the Public Staff, Water, Sewer, and Telephone Division.
Thank you. The panel is available for cross-examination and questions from the commission.
Okay. Cross-examination?
The company has no cross. Thank you.
No cross from the company. Questions then from the commissioners? Okay. Mr. Judas heard the question I asked Mr. Denton. Can you do it in 60 days? If the commission were to decide to issue an order saying, get this piece of the case tidied up and presented to us within 60 days, could you do it?
So obviously, we would do whatever the commission requires of us. I will point out, obviously the public staff did have laid out incentives and targets. And then as part of the settlement, we kind of compromised there. So we do have a starting point in my mind, and that's where we would start that conversation again and look to work with the company. I do recognize that there are challenges with that timeline because we would be faced with proposed orders in this case and the pending Aqua case. And obviously, you're going to see a lot of the same people working in both those cases. So they would certainly be challenging, but we would do whatever the commission requires.
I understand, and I'm not speaking for the commission because we haven't talked about it among ourselves. It's just from speaking only for myself. It would be nice to avoid a situation where we're already in the middle of rate year one, and then we're making decisions that may impact expenses, revenues, and credits to customers, all of those kind of things. It'd be nice to avoid that kind of mess if we could.
So could I clarify timeline?
Sure.
Just a little bit there?
That's what I'm looking for.
So obviously you have sort of base rates, whenever the commission issues its order, you have base rates until the start of rate year one, which the start of rate year one would be April 1 of 2023. At that point, that is the beginning of the metrics and any tracking. So if the metrics are approved as set out in the settlement, you would begin tracking those starting April 1, 2023. And then you'd have quarterly reports and eventually an annual review after the conclusion of rate year one. So the metrics, for the most part, wouldn't kick in terms of any incentive or penalty until that annual review, with the exception of any quarterly one. Obviously, we had talked about one of our incentives being a quarterly checkup. But depending on how those are set out in the timeline, you would be looking at potentially implementing at the annual review timeframe. I think the company has shown a willingness in the settlement to accommodate that schedule and recognizing that they would be implemented retroactively to the beginning of rate year one.
Thank you. That's very helpful. I think the appropriate phrase here, and we'll just leave it at that, is all deliberate speed. Okay. Some people actually remember that, right? All right, we have one other question, and I'm not sure who to direct this to, so I'll let you decide who it is. And I'm going to refer to Public Staff Settlement Exhibit 1 and to schedules RY1, RY2, and RY3. Actually, the question is going to be the same for all three. So let's just use schedule RY2. We only need to ask the question one time. So if you'll get Settlement Exhibit 1, schedule RY2.
Yes, we are.
You've got it?
Yes.
Okay. So on the adjustment, let's use the Carolina Water System, North Carolina Water column A. And then again, the same question will apply to all the other columns, but let's just focus on column A. So on line 48, the public staff makes an adjustment recommending a rate decrease in rate year 2 of $98,742. Got that?
Yes.
Okay. And then on line 49 in column A, the public staff, it looks to me that that's an additional adjustment to reflect an adjustment for the statutory cap limit. What's the relation? Tell me how lines 48 and 49 work together, how they fit together.
Okay, I believe 48 is the adjustment to the expense based on the public staff investigation. And then that's where they adjust the expenses, all the miscellaneous revenue, all the uncollectibles. So just like similar like the base year is a normal adjustment. The line 49 is the when we calculate the public staff recommended revenue, we base on the level of expense or their revenue, like the uncollectible or the miscellaneous revenue. So we come up with our recommended revenue amount. And then because those amount, when we apply the 5% statutory cap on the rate year 2 and 3, it will exceed that cap. So we make the adjustment. You can see that on the schedule 3-23.
Okay.
So I think here is maybe a little bit confusing the way it looks because we use the same, we try to reconcile based on the base year, like the traditional rate making. So it kind of make it is more confusing. Why is the company talk to us on that? This is like, why is only reducing the revenue amount, but these are just the presentation issue
Okay.
other than like the actual adjustment.
So
Only the-
line 48 is the adjustments to the revenue or to the expenses that the public staff says in settlement, these are the adjustments to expenses that need to be made for that rate year.
Yes.
And then you still have, you're still above the 5% cap, so you have to make an additional adjustment to bring you under the 5% cap. And
Yes.
I understand that that's using the public staff's view of how the 5% cap applies.
Yes.
I think we can follow you now, and as I say, it flows through the rest of them, so I've got that question cleaned up. Let's see if there are other questions from commissioners. Commissioner Hughes.
I just wanted to make sure I understood this. I'm just restating it, but if you look at the total columns for RY2, can I characterize it correctly if I say that the company and the public staff have taken agreement on the 25,974, but the 734,636 is one of the litigated
Yes, that's correct.
issues. Okay.
Yes.
Got it.
No further questions.
Yes. Okay, anything further from commissioners? All right, questions on commissioners' questions? That's awesome.
We do, thank you. I want to confirm if we go to Public Staff Settlement Exhibit 1, Schedule Rate Year 2, line 48 that we were just discussing. I want you to confirm that Public Staff is not recommending a decrease of 25,974.
The public staff that's not the final amount adjustment because we're still in the position of the revenue cap on that.
If we could have a moment,
You
please.
may.
Thank you, Commissioner. Could we just request a 10-minute recess, please?
I think we got enough time for that. Let's stand down. We've been going for an hour and a half. Let's take our morning break anyway. It may be a break of unequal parts, but let's take a 10-minute break here and come back at 10:40.
Thank you, Commissioner.
I forget exactly where we were, but I think we were at the questions on commissioners' questions was procedurally where we are, but I understand we may want to sort of take a somewhat different tack at this point. So who's going to tell me where exactly we are? I mean, I'm still going to give an opportunity for questions on commissioners' questions, but I understand with respect to the question that I asked concerning Public Staff Settlement Exhibit 1, Schedule RY 1, 2, and 3, that the parties have something additional they wish to offer.
If I may, Commissioner, and we can.
You may. I'm looking for someone to lead me here.
Thank you. I would propose to continue with questions on commission's questions and do it in a way to seek to clarify the issue, and then to have a proposal on a way to submit materials to the commission, which will further clarify the issue.
We'll proceed in that manner. Mr. Olson?
Thank you, Commissioner. Thank you, Gina. So, Ms. Zhang, can you please confirm that public staff is not recommending a rate decrease for rate year 2?
Are you talking about the reconciliation schedule? On the schedule RY2 and RY3?
That is
Yes,
correct.
That's the patient issue, and I think after we talk with the commission staff and the company and the public staff agree we will file a late file supplemental exhibit to clean out some confusion, and we will revise the net operating income schedule, which is schedule 3A to 3D, I believe so it'll make it simple and easier to follow.
And if I could just walk through one of the current net operating income schedules, I think it will help clarify today that there's no decrease being recommended by public staff. Ms. Zhang, could you please turn to Schedule 3A1?
Yes.
And this is the net operating income schedule just for Carolina water operations only. And this is just an example to walk through here. If you look at line 4.
Hold just a second, Mr. Olson. Let's get to the 3. Is it 3-1A?
Correct. So it's schedule 3A1. 3A1.
Is it 3A1 or 3-1A?
3A1. Sorry. And it says, top right, it says Public Staff Settlement Exhibit 1, Schedule 3A1.
We have it.
Thank you. And in the far is column G on the Excel, and it says on the far right, rate year 1, public staff recommended rates, looking specifically at line 4. This is the total operating revenues. And what number is listed there, Ms. Zhang?
That's $24,638,076. That's the public staff recommended rate year 1 before the 5% revenue cap, but with the 9.25 ROE.
And that's for water only.
Yeah, that's for Carolina water only.
So if we look at the corresponding exhibit for rate year 2, it's a different schedule, Schedule 3A2. And again, this is Carolina water operations only, rate year 2, line 4, the total operating revenues. On the far right, this will be column G on the Excel spreadsheet, on the Excel version. Ms. Zhang, what number does that reflect?
That's $25,986,812 for rate year 2. the same, again, is a ROE at 9.25 without the adjustment to the revenue cap.
And just to close the loop then, the delta between the year one operating revenues on line 4 on schedule 3A1 and the corresponding line item on the rate year 2 schedule, schedule 3A2, is $1,348,736 increase. Is that correct, Ms. Ng?
Yes.
And thank you for allowing us to walk through that demonstration. And I will state the company's agreement with the proposal stated by the witness that staff will submit a late filed supplemental schedule, which supplements certain of these schedules to make this more clear for the commission and staff.
All right, will this be a joint exhibit or a public staff exhibit? Just so I'm clear.
This will be a public staff exhibit, and the agreement is that they will send it to us for review and comment prior to its submittal. Okay.
That's correct.
That's correct? Okay, we will, please mark that when it's ready for submission after it's been reviewed as public staff, late file supplemental exhibit 1. Okay.
The company has no further questions at this time. Thank you.
Okay. Questions from the public staff on commissioner questions?
Questions?
Okay. All right, I think that brings us to conclusion with the panel. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, Ms. Holt, next.
That's the end of our case.
All right, and Ms. Sanford, it is, at least according to what I have, the rebuttal case for the company has been dealt with in Mr. DeAcenda's testimony. Does the company have any further rebuttal case to present?
We do not.
Right.
I do have, well, after you're through, I have one question.
All right, well, all right, thank you. I just wanted to be sure if you
Yes.
had any additional rebuttal case, this would be the time to take it. If not, then let me ask the parties. Have we dealt, as far as my records indicate and lists indicate, we've dealt with all exhibits in a certain manner or other. They're all now at least buttoned up for the record. Are there any other matters we need to deal with?
We had one question about your recitation of the exhibits in the testimony.
All right.
We were unclear what we heard among the three of us here as to whether Denton settlement testimony and Challenger settlement testimony was in your list.
It was in the list, but let's just confirm it again, that the pre-filed settlement testimony of Donald Denton and of Matthew Challenger are also received into evidence without further authentication or without oath or affirmation, and along with any exhibits that were accompanying them as they were pre-filed.
Thank you very much.
Got it. Okay. Anything else? All right, if not, then based on some conference with counsel during our break, I understand parties are agreeable to submitting briefs on the issues and proposed orders on for consideration by the commission within 45 days of the receipt of the transcripts. Agreed?
Yes.
All right, it will be so done. And just to sort of also in line with some of the conversation that we've had during commissioner questions, please be on the lookout for, the commission may be considering issuing an interim order requesting a status report, an interim status report on the progress of discussions relating to the performance metrics covered in the joint stipulation. So we'll have to check calendars on that. And so I'm not prepared to set that right now, but just don't be surprised if that shows up in your inbox in a few days. Okay, anything further? If not, Madam Court Reporter, you may close the record subject to receipt of late filed exhibits, and we are adjourned. Thank you all.
Thank you.